Coastal Virginia, one of the sites of the founding of America, with the iconic towns of Jamestown, Yorktown, and Williamsburg. Colonial Williamsburg in the 18th century. It was the center of government for the colony of Virginia. Many famous founding fathers, including George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Patrick Henry, James Madison, and James Monroe were part of government here. Today, this is Colonial Williamsburg's Wythe House. It's named after George Wythe, one of the Revolution's most influential patriots. Built around 1755 by his wife Elizabeth's father, the surveyor and builder Richard Tolliver, who also built part of Williamsburg's governor's palace. Now, if you head 460 miles southwest as the crow flies from the Wythe House in Williamsburg, Virginia, you'll come across the Wythe House's doppelganger, located in the North Georgia mountains. This is a twin replica of the Wythe House built in the late 1980s, located just north of the town of Blue Ridge. It's one of several Colonial Williamsburg building recreations built by Hoke Thomas Jones Jr., known to his friends as Thomas Jones. Jones's family had owned the Blue Ridge Telephone Company since 1951, the year Thomas was born. In the 1980s, using monies from the sale of the family companies, Thomas Jones ambitiously set about building his Williamsburg twin, which he named Merchant's Hope, a name taken from a 17th century settlement near present-day Hopewell, Virginia. This undertaking had the same attention to architectural and archaeological detail as Williamsburg itself. To accomplish this, Jones employed Williamsburg Foundation architect George Allen Morledge.
My name is Clark Morledge. My father is Allen Morledge, George Allen Morledge, was hired by Colonial Williamsburg along with an entire team of architects to help do historical restoration work here for the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation.
So how did Thomas Jones and George Allen Morledge first meet?
Well, the way I understand it, he just got a phone call, and my dad was well known to not only from his work for Colonial Williamsburg, but also Blandfield Plantation and other properties and designing homes for people, that he just got a call from Thomas and said, I'm interested in recreating like a miniature replica of Colonial Williamsburg in North Georgia.
Jones's interest in Colonial Williamsburg became his obsession after a trip to the Virginia landmark as a young adult in the early 1970s. The story of the restoration of Colonial Williamsburg itself is also a tale of obsession by the Reverend Dr. W.A.R. Goodwin, who is known as the father of modern-day Colonial Williamsburg. At the start of the 20th century, the 34-year-old Goodwin became rector of Williamsburg's Bruton Parish Church, located right next door to the Wythe House. All around Bruton Parish, Dr. Goodwin saw the decaying remains of 1700s-era colonial buildings, but he also recognized an opportunity. With the support of philanthropist John D. Rockefeller Jr. and his wife Abby Aldridge Rockefeller, by 1926 he had a plan for preservation. The Wythe House, which at the time was being used as the parish house, was the Rockefellers' first financial contribution. Other properties were purchased secretly to avoid land speculation. Then in 1928, the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation was formed. Its mission to restore the old capital to its 18th century glory in what would become a living history museum and later a National Historic Landmark District. So who was George Wythe?
The Wythe House is one of the more recognizable structures in Colonial Williamsburg, George Wythe himself, a very key historical figure in Virginia politics and law.
Wythe was a judge and the first American law professor. He taught and was a mentor to Thomas Jefferson and a contemporary of George Washington. His John Hancock can be found 5 places below John Hancock's John Hancock in this rather important document dated July 4th, 1776. In the famous huge selfie-like 1819 painting of the signing of the Declaration of Independence by John Trumbull, Wythe is in the far left, at the edge of the scene, partially cropped out. Perhaps he was just shy, or maybe a better explanation is that selfies weren't quite yet a thing in 1819. In 1776, Thomas Jefferson and family slept at the Wythe House while he was a delegate to the Virginia General Assembly. In September 1781, prior to the siege of Yorktown, the Wythe House served as headquarters for Washington, with French General Rochambeau using the house as headquarters in the battle's aftermath. Wythe died in 1806 under mysterious circumstances, rumored to have been poisoned by his grandnephew. His home passed into the hands of private owners for the next century. The Colonial Williamsburg Foundation acquired the property in 1938. It was then that it was restored to its 1750s colonial appearance. The renovation of the handsome 2-story brick residence of George Wythe was completed in 1940. Almost 50 years later, in 1986, the Wythe House of North Georgia's construction began as an almost exact duplicate, following the ratio of 1:2 between height and width across its facade.
But my dad really liked the idea, the challenge of trying to integrate the history of what this building was and what it represented and what it must have looked like at that time.
Construction workers from all over North Georgia were employed through the various stages of building. Before construction began in the summer of 1986, 2 of the contractors, Ken Picklesheimer and Randy Collins, traveled to Williamsburg with Thomas Jones.
Mr. Jones wanted to know if we would go with him to Williamsburg, that he had a permission to go into the original George Wythe House.
And from what I understand, we were the first people or the only people they'd ever let do that. Thomas had talked them into all this. He had a lot of connections up there. And they let us tour that house and get all kind of measurements, take a lot of pictures.
In Georgia, the initial brick order for construction of the Wythe House and its walkways totaled 105,000 bricks. Bricks were handmade by the Old Carolina Brick Company in Salisbury, North Carolina.
Since they wanted it as near the original house as could be, the brick at the time, that was another thing. They didn't have brick factories, so they handmade those bricks.
A combination of English and Flemish bond work was used in the masonry. In the front of the Georgia Wythe House, to the right of the front door, there's a special brick that stands out from the rest. This brick is a brick from the original Wythe House in Williamsburg. The windows feature old-style single-pane colonial glass, which would have been hand-blown into a disc cylinder, then cut to the window pane shape. Window shutters feature wrought iron hinges and holdbacks copied from the Williamsburg Wythe House. They were all handmade by blacksmiths in Williamsburg for Jones. Detached outbuildings to either side of the main residence include a colonial kitchen, smokehouse, laundry, stable, and more. Inside, the great attention to detail continues.
On the doors, shutters, they fold out. And you come back in, when the old original guys that done this back in Williamsburg days, Wythe Mansion, they had to be very skilled.
The staircase of the Georgia Wythe House contains a little secret. A single baluster is upside down, just like the staircase in Williamsburg. One explanation says it's from an old colonial superstition designed to confuse ghosts and haints.
But he wanted that put in there, like the Williamsburg mansion. It said it kept the ghosts from going up and down the stairs.
Yet another explanation says if you put one baluster in upside down, you admit you're only human. So who was Thomas Jones? Jones was an eccentric visionary, an accomplished pianist who also played the harpsichord and organ. His harpsichord was handmade by Peter Redstone, another Colonial Williamsburg craftsman.
Well, he was an interesting guy. He believed in living for today and heck with tomorrow, you know. And he's really in love with Williamsburg style and the old homes and that kind of stuff.
For the Georgia Wythe House gardens, Jones employed Colonial Williamsburg landscape architect Gordon W. Chappell. Jones insisted on replicating the Wythe House symmetrical gardens exactly. He made multiple visits to Williamsburg, marching off measurements along the garden's brick paths himself. Chappell helped find plants that would fulfill the Wythe House design, yet survive the Georgia mountain climate. Construction of the Wythe House recreation in Georgia was finished in 1988. Back in Williamsburg, Virginia, Wetherburn Tavern is a restoration completed in 1968 of a 1740s-era structure that was owned by Henry Wetherburn. And back in Georgia, a twin of Wetherburn Tavern stands with its 8 gables and 3 chimneys and precise attention to the colonial aesthetic. Little is actually known about Henry Wetherburn, who died on November 19, 1760. It's not known what Henry Wetherburn even looked like, because no paintings exist of him from the 18th century. There is an interesting footnote. In 1968, the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation found an artist to interpret what Wetherburn might have looked like. The artist spent several days roaming Williamsburg with his sketchbook, creating his interpretation of Henry Wetherburn in pencil. That artist was Norman Rockwell. The Georgia Wetherburn Tavern was completed in 1989 and for several years operated as a restaurant at Merchant's Hope. Visitors would have enjoyed a colonial dining experience with the dining room lit only by candlelight and the servers dressed in colonial attire. Heating and cooling of the Georgia Wythe House and Wetherburn Tavern came from a geothermal system that ran pipes deep underground all the way to the main highway. This eliminated the need for unsightly traditional heating and air conditioning equipment normally mounted outside of the buildings. Other buildings at Merchant's Hope were built in the early 1990s and include a couple of small shops, including a post office, whose designs were replicated from buildings on Duke of Gloucester Street in Colonial Williamsburg. A small farrier blacksmith's barn for shodding horses was similar to those seen on coastal Virginia plantations. In Colonial Williamsburg, about a block from Wetherburn's Tavern, is the 1790s-era George Wythe House, which was built using large portions of an early 1740s home built by Captain Hugh Orr, a prominent blacksmith from Scotland. The Wythe House was restored in Williamsburg in 1931. The Georgia version was built in 1993. It follows the style of architecture and floor plan of the Williamsburg building, but not the original exterior color and -1 chimney. Merchant's Hope Church in Hopewell, Virginia, was established in 1657 and completed in 1743. That church, now over 275 years old, stands to this day 27 miles west of Williamsburg. Williamsburg landscape architect Gordon Chappell's family roots go back to an ancestor who was likely a charter member of this church. Chappell recounted that at some point in his conversations with Thomas Jones, he mentioned his own ancestor's connection to Merchant's Hope Church. Jones traveled to see Merchant's Hope Church in Virginia the next day, and it was the inspiration for the Georgia Chapel constructed in 1995. Its simple yet classic interior style follows that of the Hopewell, Virginia church, as does the similar distinctive curved kick of the eaves detail found on the exterior. But the Merchants Hope Church in Hopewell, Virginia didn't have a bell tower. So the bell tower was inspired by Colonial Williamsburg's Bruton Parish Church, with the shortened version of the bell tower sized to complement the smaller chapel. The 125-pound bell strikes hourly, and the circa 1853 225-pound bell on special occasions. With the completion of the chapel in 1995, Merchants Hope construction came to a halt. Unfortunately, around that time, the restaurant closed to the public, and the entire village receded from view. There were ideas for other buildings, but in 1997, Jones ran out of funds and was forced to auction the entire property. Soon after, he moved down to central Georgia for a time, later returning to Blue Ridge, where he died in 2011. Some have said that Williamsburg's colonial twin, built by Thomas Jones in the North Georgia mountains, is out of place for the area, and it doesn't belong to the region's history. But the fact is, these buildings are now more than 30 years old, so they are part of the region's history. And that history shows that a man had a vision and a dream and succeeded at building something special, something that is likely to be here 100 years from now, when people will ask, why?
It's just one thing to build a house that has a colonial architecture and colonial style. It's another thing to build essentially was a small village.
I don't think people give him the recognition of what he was doing at the time. For somebody to spend this much money and time on a project like this wasn't heard of, you know. And I was honored to get to do it, tickled to death.
Merchants Hope, North Georgia's remarkable colonial curiosity. So how do you sum up this place? Well, history doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. Have a story idea for this show? Visit us at historybend.org and let us know.